Good morning aboard Pride of Baltimore 2 in Baltimore, Maryland. A rainy day. It has been for almost 24 hours. And you're with Captain Miles and Coffee with. We have Chief Mate Jeff Crosby behind the camera.
Hello, everyone.
And Jeff, what do we have for getting started?
So the first question of the day is from John Schellenberger. Are there any major projects you were undertaking on the boat that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to do in a normal sailing season?
Well, we have one year by year by year in the last, say, 6 or so years. We've wanted to repaint the main engines.
Yeah.
So this has been sort of a wintertime thing. Our thinking has been it would be in the wintertime, but it never gets done. We have other priorities. We're dealing with the rig, dealing with other factors. And so right now, the engineer has been cleaning, taking off, stripping, getting ready to repaint the main engines high and low, not just a little bit here and there, but complete. So
Yeah.
we're excited about that.
Lots of scraping, lots of little wire brushing, all of that good stuff. To kind of add on to that, there's been one wish list item on my work list that has taken many years to be able to do. We actually have an area where we have a trash can in the galley, and it's a little bit of an odd area.
Right.
And a normal sized trash can doesn't fit into that spot. So it's been on my list to build a trash can, and I've finally been able to do that. So this has been a pretty great period of maintenance. The next question coming up is from Dana. What would be the max speed, wind speed, you would tack in?
Oh, interesting. It's more about the sea state. If we had a lot of wind and not very much sea state, say we're in a relatively protected area, we wouldn't have the square topsail up in a lot of wind. So it would just be a regular schooner, in which case you can get around pretty much in any kind of wind strength, hypothetically. The sea state that is made by a strong wind is going to be the thing. So if you're offshore, we would not be tacking in sea states of 6 to 8 feet. That'd be the maximum. We can do it, but we would avoid it. Particularly as it gets from, say, 8 to 10. So winds that make that could be a steady state of 20. So it's not a lot of wind that can make a big sea state offshore.
Sure.
So so it's quite various, but it's mostly commanded by how big the seas are.
Okay, so less wind, more sea state. This next question is coming from Greg Bauer. Hi, Captain. I followed the Pride of Baltimore 2 during her 2019 Great Lakes voyage and was always excited to hear about the race portions. Now, the winner of the race isn't necessarily the first to cross the line, so what are the other factors that determine a race winner?
Well, there's a handicap system. There's a very wonderful one made by the English organization called Sail Training International. And they're the ones that run the so-called tall ships. So tall ship races, that handicap's been around for a little more than half a century, since not long after the World War II. And that is the most inclusive handicap system. Modern boats and the great classics like square riggers are all included in that. And it's a time-on-time calculation. So the longer the race, everything changes. The shorter the race in terms of time, it changes everything. It involves the dimensions of the ship. It involves the sail design. For instance, they ask you how sharp you can brace. So they take that into account. There's no other handicap that looks into those kinds of details. Now, they don't tell you what the handicap formula is. That is a secret, and the success has raised a lot of questions. How do you do it? What's the way? What's the trick? So a lot of the modern handicaps are getting into correcting for wind factors. there's a number of handicaps out there that we're just recently being measured for, whereby they have wind ranges, and they'll record the wind ranges through the period of the race, and then apply correction factors as those wind ranges have changed as the races advance. These things have been going on as an effort for the last 20 years, maybe a little longer with the start of the PHRF stuff. So there's a big look at constantly looking at conditions. So when it comes to Pride being handicapped, the big holy grail is, can we both be first across the finish line and also save our time on everybody else, so that we're not only the first physically to finish, but also to handicap finish. And we can be first across the line and not be first. So we've had that happen a number of times. Fortunately, and that's something we always enjoy, there have been a number of times when we've been able to be across the finish line first and hold our time in our class.
Yeah, the line honors is a little bit prestigious. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. If you're just tuning in, we have Captain Jan Miles here, Coffee with Captain. Chief Mate Jeff Crosby behind the camera. This next question is from Alicia. If you were to run a British blockade of the Chesapeake, what kind of weather would you say is most ideal?
Yeah, I wonder. I've not read as to what their practice was, what there was a common practice, and maybe history has written that. My sense of it is that a northeast direction wind gives a slant that gets you out of the bay, but it also puts the British downwind. See, what I understand of the British blockade, it was mostly interested in the mouth of the bay, and that they sent smaller vessels up the bay initially, where they did the cutting out for privateers that were over in the rivers on the western side of the lower bay in Virginia. And those would be boats getting somewhat near, and then putting smaller boats and rowing up to these anchored vessels. So when it comes to actually sailing, if you can have the weather gauge, you have a lot of options. And so if the wind direction was northeast and it was either heavy rain and low visibility, you did it at night, that would be a slant that would be pretty powerful, port tack, reach on out of the bay. If it was really, really light, then the power and the ability to sail as a schooner or a square topsail schooner, when the British are mostly, the bigger ships are mostly square. See, one of the things that you have to remember with the British is that they were bringing their ships from England to then blockade the East Coast. So they're like any modern Navy today. If we have our American Navy somewhere else in the world, we have to have our own supply system. We have to carry everything with us. So the ability to have smaller vessels in the bay was a limited factor in the beginning of the British blockade, and that's why they were also looking to keep some of the American vessels that they caught. But I would think that a northeast that was either really, really light, but you could do 6 knots, 5 knots, 4 knots, and you were to weather, and they were trying to go to windward to get to you, is one area. Or a sort of a wintry kind of, or a rainy kind of situation, and you're able to sneak through at night with a northeast.
And low visibility
might
help.
Low visibility, right.
Cool. Well, we're going to shift gears and do something that we haven't done yet with a Coffee with Captain. I'm actually going to get in front of the camera. Captain Miles is going to ask me a few questions. But in the meantime, if you have other questions that you would like to have answered, please chime in on the comments, and we'll try and get those answered.
So Chief Mate Jeff Crosby.
Hello.
You have been on this vessel not only for a while, but you also came to this vessel for the first time sometime in the mid-aughts.
Yeah. 2008 was my first introduction to Pride.
So what was that like, and how does that compare to today?
Oh, I was younger, so that was a big difference. I don't know, my early draws into sailing were more about getting out and about and putting as much sail up and the hard work and the long voyages. But kind of as you grow into it, you see the other sides of sailing. You've got the boat maintenance, and you've got a lot of the more technical aspects, logistics and weather planning and all of that kind of stuff. So there's kind of been a big shift from when I first started on Pride to now what I'm doing on Pride. And that's been kind of fun, and a lot of challenges along the way to get here.
Yeah, so you went to, your family is a marina operating family.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, inland, but on a really big lake. And I grew up not only using boats, sailing on boats, but also working on boats at the family boat shop. And through that, kind of grew a pretty big interest in working in boats. So I ended up going to the Landing School, which is a school of boat building and design up in southern Maine, to kind of flesh out my experience and add in some new information and learning. And that's been incredibly useful throughout my life, throughout my career. There's a lot that I learned at the Landing School and was exposed to that kind of helped me figure out what is boat maintenance, not just wooden boat maintenance, but boat maintenance generally speaking, and being able to kind of keep a finger on all of those fields, whether it's fiberglass or composite or wood or steel, kind of keeps you in the loop about all of the new materials and finishes and whatever it may be. Boats are a whole different world when it comes to maintenance and finish work.
Well, so you sailed with us as a deckhand for a couple, almost two full seasons.
Yeah.
And I think you worked with us 3 winters doing maintenance in those the second half of the aughts. You went back to the family business. Mm-hmm. So that Landing School background probably applied equally to this vessel as it does to that program as it did to this vessel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So years later, what brings you back to the sailing business?
Rather
than the family business?
I mean, it's mostly this boat. This boat is really great. Pride is, the initial draw, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is, her beauty. She kind of stands apart, and if coming from a boat repair and boat building background, Pride is really well built. She's really she's very aesthetically pleasing. She's a really good mix between paints and varnishes. You've got the extreme rake, which is a unique feature. A lot of people feel it makes her look super fast at the dock. She's got relatively low freeboard, so she's just a very aesthetically pleasing boat. And then you get the chance to sail on her, and she's a pretty wonderfully performing boat. So that really kept me coming back, season after season, and was a pretty big draw of me coming back tail end of 2016 again, is just how the boat performs, and just the overall mission of Pride and what she does.
Well, I gotta say that all that marina, ship care, boat care background, along with the Landing School, you coming back to the ship, it's been a real blessing for the ship. I have sort of run out of my ability to spot things that ought to be taken care of, and so the shipkeeper, chief mate Jeff Crosby, it's been a benefit to the ship in her 32 years now, counting. Very much so, and we'll very much appreciate you being here. We have our guest producer in the background, David, our deckhand, David Stoltz. Do we have any questions that have come through?
Sure, yeah. We have one question here from Tom Price, who says, Privateer York left Baltimore with 120 crew. After many captures, she was down to 60 crew after manning many prizes, then headed home. How in the world did they manage with 120, much less 60 men aboard a schooner smaller than Pride?
Well, yeah, how did they manage? So one of the things that we have aboard Pride, as you can see in the background a little bit, is there's accommodation. The middle of the ship is divided up into a place for the crew to assemble, to eat, to associate. There are cabins to the side. There's a galley. Those vessels were cavernous. They were just plain wide open from the number of berths they had in the aft cabin for the officers and the captain, or in the maybe something in the very, very front of the boat. In between, it was a cargo area. So my imagination is that it was, you just threw yourself into a place. You might have a hammock, but the boat would be carrying a lot of supplies. They'd have to feed themselves. They'd have to nourish themselves. And the reason they had so many is that they not only sailed the boat, but they also and had to sail it well if they were running away from the Navy or wanting to capture another vessel, and that meant constantly handling sailing gear. But they also had guns. They also had sharpshooters because they put some folks up in the rig to deal with that. So to have that capability. So, and then when they captured a vessel, they would slowly lose their people to be prize crew and sailors. So you had to go out with a whole lot, and then you came back, and you had to keep enough on board so that you could at least have a chance to run away from the Navy, Royal Navy, as on your way home. I would say that it was just plain haphazard camping on board the boat. It
A
would
little
be,
bit chaotic.
yeah, there would be you'd be on top of each other unless you could, and maybe you could do a couple of hammocks over under each other, but it was probably just sleep in the dunnage, sleep on a coil of rope.
Yeah, find a spot, curl up.
Yeah.
Another question here from Steven Selinger. He says, is there any notion of golf handicapping in tall ship racing? Dynamic scoring based on performance over time?
Well, I'm not sure I know how to answer that question other than the way I answered it before, and that is the time-on-time business. If you have a 10-mile race and it takes you an hour versus the same 10-mile race and the whole fleet does it in 3 hours, each vessel's correction factor is based on the length of time it took them to go the distance. It's not about the distance itself, it's the time. So each vessel had a different time, and their correction factor would have a play with that. Now, there are races that do time on distance, so the correction factor is fixed to the number of miles that the race course covers. So in the case of time on time, it's a very, very fungible result at the end. A lot of fairness comes with the time on time based with the correction factor that doesn't exist in the time on distance race.
To kind of add into that, there are some racing equations that do factor in previous performance. It doesn't change the numbers or your rating very much, but over time it can slowly shift your rating if you continue to win. It's less so in the traditional world, more so in the one design fleet or a yacht club, where you have a bunch of different kind of more fiberglass boats and long-term, summers of races, so it's to kind of keep the playing field fair.
So, okay, thank you for joining us aboard Pride of Baltimore 2 and Coffee with, in this case, Captain Miles and Shipkeeper Chief Mate Jeff Crosby. And good morning to you, and stay diligent.